Hi, everyone. I'm going to apologize ahead of time. These are not going to be super professional videos. What I have for you here are some lessons that I'll be putting out weekly on Isaiah and the Book of Mormon. So this is to go hand in hand with this Isaiah Book of Mormon study group that I'm starting here locally, which I started after I received some inspiration about something else that I was praying about entirely. And I got this really seemingly unrelated answer of start an Isaiah class. So that's what I'm doing here. And also it seems that I need to put this out as well for you, which I'm happy to do, but just know that it's going to be like my husband sitting here next to me playing video games and stuff like that. So, all right. So what this is an Isaiah class that goes in conjunction with our Come Follow Me Book of Mormon study in 2024. And as you know, there is a lot of Isaiah in the Book of Mormon, and you probably know that more from frustration than anything. But my goal this year is to help you actually understand those Isaiah passages. So let's just get into it. I'm going to share my screen here. Okay, so this first lesson, which we'll be doing on Sunday the 7th, is great are the words of Isaiah. Do you know who said that? It was Jesus. In 3 Nephi 23, he said, "Yea, a commandment I give unto you, that ye search these things diligently. For great are the words of Isaiah. For surely he spake as touching all things concerning my people, which are of the house of Israel. Therefore it must needs be that he must speak also unto the Gentiles." Now we're going to get into that, but first I want to point out that this is a commandment, right? This is not like a, hey, this would be something good to read. This is actually one of the commandments that Jesus gives us. And he says, great are the words of Isaiah. Now, he doesn't say that about any other prophet. And there were a lot of great prophets. So there's a reason for this, why he's specifically pointing out Isaiah, and really why the Book of Mormon prophets included him so much in what they wrote. And one of those reasons is that, as Jesus says here, he spake concerning all things, concerning Israel. And if you'll recall, President Nelson actually invited us several years ago to really study all the promises and covenants that Jesus makes with Israel. And so one of the reasons why Isaiah is so great is because if you want to know what those are, go to Isaiah. It's all there. He covers all of it. He says so right here. And he's speaking to the Gentiles. Why? We're going to explain that in just one moment. Now, roughly, very closely, 1/3 of Isaiah is in the Book of Mormon. Now, here's some fun math for you. There are actually 66 chapters in Isaiah. There's a reason for that. Isaiah is really big on patterns. So that number is significant. Now, in the Book of Mormon, 20 chapters of Isaiah are directly quoted. And I figured out with my rudimentary math skills that that is 30%. And then if you go to Book of Mormon Central, they have this other information here that says that the Book of Mormon quotes 414 of the 1,292 verses in Isaiah. So that's 32% of the book of Isaiah that is quoted just verse for verse. And then at least another 34 verses, they say, which is 3% of Isaiah, are paraphrased. So here's some fun math here at the bottom. 30 plus 32 plus 3 is 66. Now, I know that seems kind of like random math. I mean, did Mormon go through and do the math to include, essentially 66% of Isaiah in the Book of Mormon? I mean, probably not. But in my experience, this is just one of those things that God just kind of does and can really only orchestrate himself in such a way that it's obvious to those who are looking. And I was looking at these numbers, and it just seemed to me like there was something there. And then when I put this together, I came up with 66. So is it coincidence? I don't know. But what I do know is that after studying Isaiah intensely for a good year and a half of my life and then some, I know that the Book of Mormon is patterned after Isaiah. I know that Mormon told us that he couldn't even include 1/10, right, of everything that he had there in the record. So what was the pattern? What was the format that he used to decide what to include and what to leave out? And I believe it was the Book of Mormon, and I think you'll see why as we continue to study throughout the rest of this year and just see all these connections that can't possibly be coincidences. Now, admittedly, Isaiah is difficult to understand. Nephi himself said this. He said, "For behold, Isaiah spake many things which are hard for many of my people to understand." Now, Nephi understood Isaiah, and he said that there were some keys to understanding him, and he gave us 3 of those. So first off, he says that in order to understand Isaiah, you need to be filled with the spirit of prophecy. Now, what is the spirit of prophecy? We're told in the book of Revelation that a testimony of Jesus Christ is the spirit of prophecy. Now, that could mean anything from, a little child getting up on the pulpit and saying, "I believe in Jesus Christ," because if that came from Christ, that testimony, that is a testimony of Jesus Christ. But it can also go all the way up to a personal witness from Jesus Christ, a personal witness of Jesus Christ. Anything that's coming directly from him that is inspired, that are his words, his thoughts, his will put into our hearts and minds, that is the spirit of prophecy. So if you have any of that on any level, you have that spiritual gift. It's just a matter of developing it. And in my experience, study of Isaiah absolutely helps to develop that gift. All right, the second key is that we need to be taught after the manner of the things of the Jews. That's something that I hope to be able to help you with. We'll actually go over some of that today. But I am by no means an expert. I have learned some Hebrew on my own. I have learned, of course, from Avraham Gileadi and the Isaiah Institute and through a lot of the resources there, that enough so that hopefully it will give you the foundation that you need to understand Isaiah. And finally, Nephi says that in order to be able to understand Isaiah, you need to live in the last days, when men shall know of a surety at the times when they, meaning the prophecies of Isaiah, shall come to pass. And guess what? You've got that covered. You are living in the last days, so you're golden there. All right, so let's dig in a little bit to the manner of the Jews. One of the things that is really an integral part of Hebrew tradition and just a manner of prophecy is to take things from the past and then apply them to the future as a pattern or a type. And Isaiah himself tells us, or rather really Jehovah tells us, that this is what's going on in the book of Isaiah, where he commands him, "Go now, write on tablets concerning them, record it in a book for the end time, as a testimony forever." Now, if you have ever heard that the Book of Mormon was written for our day, you should understand this. This is exactly what they did in the Book of Mormon. They did it like the book of Isaiah, where you had all of these prophets that, yes, they were prophesying for things in their day. They were prophesying to the people of their time, and it applied to them. And also, it was compiled in such a way that it applies to people in the end time. So it was both. In 3 Nephi 23, Jesus says that all things that Isaiah spake have been and shall be, right? Following that same pattern, even according to the words which he spake. And in the Old Testament, Ecclesiastes speaks to this as well, this cultural sort of manner of doing things. It says, "The thing that hath been is that which shall be, and that which is done is that which shall be done, and there is no new thing under the sun. You've probably heard that phrase before. There's nothing new under the sun. And that just means that there are patterns and things that repeat themselves, and that God works through these patterns to prophesy and help us understand things going on as they unfold in our day. Now, another manner of the Jews that is important to understand is literature, their literature. So their literature was one of, really, if not the main art form in which they worked. It would be like us and movies, right? It's just something that a lot of thought went into what they wrote. Not everybody had a paper and pencil. It wasn't common everywhere in the world for everyone to be literate. So it was something that was very structured, just like a movie. You know, everything that goes into that film is edited, it's precise, it's gone over again and again. Nothing is in there by accident. And then within that, there are some structures. So there's the chiasmus. A lot of you might be familiar with that. A chiasmus is kind of like a mirror or a balance, like I have shown here, that's used to articulate the balance of order within the text. So for instance, in Isaiah, you have chapter 1 that is reflected in chapter 66. Chapter 2 is reflected in chapter 65, and so on and so on and so on. And that's used to highlight often what's in the center of that chiasmus. But sometimes it's also used to highlight what's on the tail ends of it. So it just kind of depends. And these structures are there to help us interpret what this is saying, where our focus should be, and what the focal point and the main message is of that particular section of text. The next thing is called a parallelism. So a parallelism is a common literary feature of Hebrew poetry in the Old Testament in which the words of two or more lines of text are directly related in some way. So in one chapter of Isaiah, it may talk about like these waters flooding and overflowing the banks, and then it'll talk about this arch tyrant or like this end time antichrist figure. And you'll see as we go through and study that in the way that that's structured, now you know, oh, whenever he's talking about water in that way, you could also relate that to an antichrist figure. And so you know that those two things are related. And so when you come across text that may seem like it's not talking about anything, you can then go back to the context of the rest of that chapter and say, oh, okay, we're still talking about this subject, this person, or this event. And then finally, Isaiah specifically is going to incorporate a lot of ancient mythology and ancient archetypes. You could even say Jungian archetypes into his text. And what's important to understand about this is this mythology was well known throughout the world. It was just generally understood. It would be like if I were to say something like the Avengers, right? Or Spider-Man. You would know what I was talking about. Why? Because this is a mythology that has permeated our culture. Everybody understands that imagery and what that means. And it was the same thing in Isaiah's day. And they even had, I would say, a smaller library to draw from. So these things were definitely well known. All right, so going back to this idea of patterns, Isaiah has, throughout the text, this layered literary structure, and it's set up like a code or kind of like an encryption. And this, again, should be familiar to us in our day and age. If you want to get online or get into a program and access information, you need the password, right? You need the key. And that should also ring some bells, I would say, for people who've gone through the temple. In order to get that information, you need that. And the purpose for this in Isaiah's text is that because there are multiple ways of interpreting things, and again, one thing that Avraham Gileadi said, and if you don't know who Avraham is, he is the one who worked with Hugh Nibley at BYU and with these other really well-known prominent biblical scholars on interpreting Isaiah and decoding it. Really, he did, like, I think 10 years of postdoctoral work on Isaiah, on encrypting it, so to speak. And he also was learning to become a Jewish rabbi, so he understood the manner of the Jews very well. And he says that it's a very Gentile thing to take a verse of scripture and say, this is the interpretation, and that's the only interpretation. Like, that's it. That's how you interpret that verse. That's not how the Hebrews do things. There are multiple layers to it. There are multiple ways of looking at it. And also, Isaiah was very careful to structure his prophecy in such a way that it could not be misinterpreted. If you wanted to interpret a certain symbol a certain way, it had to match up with these other things. That's also why Isaiah is so complex. That's why it's been so difficult to understand until our day and age, where really you would almost have to have a computer that could go through and match up all of these concepts and words and things like that. So it makes sense that really it was this sealed book, which it is. We'll go into that later on and discuss that. That was sealed so that it couldn't be tampered with. So we could really have it in its purest form possible for our day and age to use it for the purposes that are needed to build up the kingdom in these end times. So again, this shouldn't be new to us. In Doctrine and Covenants 52, the Lord says, I will give you a pattern in all things that ye may not be deceived. And that's exactly what Isaiah did here. Structured it so that it couldn't be tampered with, so that we wouldn't be deceived. Now, I'm not going to go into all of this, and you don't even need to memorize all of this, but if this is a useful tool for you, you can find these things on some of the resources that I'll show you later. I just put this out in picture form because I'm a visual person, and I'm sure it could even be structured more perfectly mathematically. I just kind of eyeballed it. But what you have here are Isaiah's 7 layers, these literary layers of these sort of texts within a text. And first, over here on the left-hand side, we have these antithetical themes. Think of this kind of as that yin-yang symbol that I showed earlier with the parallelism. Antithetical themes are this balance. You can see, like in Isaiah 1 through 5 and 34 through 35, you have ruin and rebirth, and then you have rebellion and compliance, punishment and deliverance. And you'll notice this from chapter 1 of Isaiah. It'll be all of this sort of hellfire and damnation, and then, oh, the beauties of Zion and wonderful things for those who hear God. And then, oh, for those who rebel, it's going to be awful. But for those who listen, it's going to be wonderful. And he does that throughout the text. But then within that, you have actually one of these ancient mythological types here of rebellion or trouble at home. This would be the story of Odysseus, where there's exile abroad and then the return and a happy homecoming. And then you can see some of these other things. There's even a parallelism that runs through the entire thing, which also makes the case for this all being written by one person, as opposed to what many scholars believe, which is that it was written by multiple people over a long period of time. Some of that is because they don't actually believe that Isaiah prophesied about the coming of certain kings and stuff like that. But we know that, of course, that is more than possible for a prophet of God to do that. Okay, so another thing, if you really want to understand Isaiah, is to know what his code words are. Because again, he's taking things from the past and using them to represent things in the future. Many things which maybe he didn't have a language for or couldn't specifically name. So for instance, Egypt is a code word that Isaiah uses to represent a world superpower, because that's what Egypt was in his day. It was the world superpower that was supplanted by another superpower. So when he's speaking of the current world superpower, who's he referring to? The king of Assyria. is another one of these types. The king of Assyria was just going through and just wiping everyone out, taking over the world, targeting Israel, scattering them. So this would be actually symbolic of an end time tyrant type figure, an end time antichrist figure or entity or political structure, anything like that could be encapsulated by this term, king of Assyria. Arm, mouth, tongue. These are just a few, but these are some of the really crucial ones that I feel are important to understand. You've probably heard the arm of Jehovah, that phrase used a lot. Well, within Isaiah, that refers to something specific. It refers to specific person or people. Same thing with his mouth, his tongue. It could also mean the arm, mouth, or tongue of the Antichrist, because again, there's that juxtaposition, those parallelisms, or antithetical themes, rather. Water imagery is going to be huge in Isaiah. Again, waters of life flowing and refreshment and all of that, or flooding and damage and all of those kinds of things. So it's both. And then you have the servant. Now the servant we're going to go into in just a little bit. But in one aspect of Isaiah, that refers to a very specific person or group of people. A rod, again, it's not just symbolic, right? And that's kind of another thing that I've noticed as I've studied more with this understanding of the manner of the Hebrews is, as Christians, we tend to look at the Hebrews and criticize them for being too literal. They were too literal and they were expecting things to play out a certain way, and so they didn't understand Christ. But at the same time, you could say the same thing for how Christians interpret, especially things in the Old Testament. We're so symbolic that we often miss what that symbolism is literally pointing to in a lot of ways. So just be aware of that too. And wrath. So even something like anger or wrath, that could represent a person or an event. And when you go to the resources, these words will actually be highlighted for you so that you can look at and see what the codes are, that the links and stuff like that are to the specific meanings throughout the text. Okay, and finally, what we have here set up in Isaiah is something that is termed the 7 spiritual levels of humanity. Now, again, this may ring a little bit familiar to some of you. We have Isaiah's ladder, we have Jacob's ladder, where you have the angels ascending and descending from heaven. If you've ever heard of the ascension of Isaiah, it ascends to these different levels of heaven. And I believe that that's a pretty accurate text. I think that was probably written by Isaiah or someone who was his contemporary. Anyway, so throughout Isaiah, he's going to use certain terms, code words, that represent these groups of people in an effort to help us understand who we are within this text, where we are, and where we need to be, or where we should want to be. So, or where we don't want to be, actually. So the first one is perdition. Now, Isaiah doesn't just come right out and say perdition. He's actually going to use words like dust and chaos as part of this decreation motif when describing this group of people. And these are people who are at a spiritual point of no return. Hopefully, we don't have to worry about that one too much. The next group is Babylon or Chaldea. And really, that's pretty self-explanatory. These people are Babylon, or as Nephi would call them, the whore of the earth, and that great whore. So they're just very worldly, very much in the way of the worldly way of doing things, not interested in following God at all. But maybe they're not quite, they certainly aren't at the perdition level, but they're definitely celestial people. Number 3 is Jacob, Israel. These people, if you hear that word, Jacob or Israel, know that he is referring to people who actually believe in God. who on some level believe and follow God. Maybe they're church members who go to church, who have been baptized or received certain ordinances, and yet they're often referred to as deaf or blind or asleep. I think to President Nelson's address to the priesthood, I want to say that was in 2019, maybe earlier, 2018, where he tells them to specifically awake and arise. You know, he says it over and over. He even has the men stand up. And I really think he was taking some of that from this and also the Book of Mormon. In fact, I did a presentation on that if you're interested. But these are people who believe that they are on the path, like Jesus says, like many who try to enter into the way, but Jesus says, I don't know you, or you didn't know me, because they haven't woken up yet. They haven't moved beyond sort of just the basic steps of the law, I guess you could say, like the Jews did, of just sort of following, you know, the law and doing certain ordinances, and now we're good as long as we keep those certain ordinances, like, you know, we'll get into heaven. And so they aren't bad people. I would say they're probably just men of the earth who have not yet been made perfect. And then the next level is the Zion Jerusalem level. If you hear the word Zion or Jerusalem, it's referring to this group. These are covenant people of God, who are often referred to also as virgins, who are awake. So virgins meaning that they have been sanctified on some level through their covenants by the power of the Holy Ghost or of the Holy Spirit of promise. They understand that Zion is the goal, and they've woken up to that, and they are seeking for those promised blessings and have likely received some confirmations or blessings in return. The fifth level is sons or daughters, I put in there, although usually throughout Isaiah, it's mostly referred to as sons, and servants. They're both going to be a part of this category. Remember, I mentioned servant earlier was a really important key word. These people are God's elect. So think of elect as in someone's calling, an election being made sure, or many are chosen, or many are called, sorry, but few are chosen. Well, chosen and elect, that's the same thing. So these are the holy ones. Now, this has to do with another level of covenant keeping. And in Isaiah, it's known as the Davidic covenant. This has to do with this political structure in the Middle East, where you had an emperor who essentially ruled over a vast empire with lots of little kingdoms or fiefdoms. And ruling over those many kingdoms were these vassals who would serve the emperor. And when they proved themselves just totally loyal to the emperor, to the point where there was no question of their loyalty, they would essentially be adopted by the emperor and become a son or a daughter of that emperor. And now that was a sure covenant that they had, and that would never be taken away. But it was actually not just between them and the emperor, but it was on behalf of the people they ruled over, so that they could intercede on their behalf. So kind of interesting to think about as we move on to these next levels. The sixth one is known as seraphs or seraphim. So these are the people who are referred to in Isaiah as some kind of angelic personage or emissary. They're, especially in Nephi, they're going to be referred to as kings and queens, specifically kings and queens of the Gentiles. We'll get into that again a little bit later. So you might hear words like everlasting in reference to these people, or exalted. These are like those people on Jacob's ladder, those angels ascending and descending up to heaven and down from heaven. The Book of Mormon is just filled with examples of these kinds of people. It's such a wonderful resource for that. And it's going to be so fun as we get to dive into that this year and explore those characteristics and how those people got to where they were, really, as a pattern for us to follow. And finally, of course, the ultimate level of ascension and ultimate example for us to follow is Jehovah, the God of Israel, mentioned in Isaiah, who himself becomes the savior of the whole world and is a God, right? And although we don't really achieve that level per se in this life, we become, you could say, little saviors on Mount Zion, small s, right? As we follow in his footsteps and listen to his voice and become empowered through him and the covenants that we make with him. Okay, so that was a lot that I threw at you there. But I just want to make you aware of some of the resources that are available to you as you embark on your study of Isaiah this year. And then we'll apply some of now of what we've learned and some of my understanding to the opening title page of the Book of Mormon. All right, so now let's go into Isaiah Explained. This is how I started my study of Isaiah. This is before I had some other resources available to me, and it's all free, which is fantastic. You can just come on here, go to every single chapter of Isaiah, and you're going to have the Isaiah Institute translation, which is so much more understandable than the King James version. And also just so much study has been put into making sure that it is exact and correct. But along with this, you can listen to an audio reading of the chapter. And then over here, you can look at the, or listen to, you can also read the analytical commentary that goes along with every single verse. So this is Avraham going verse by verse through every single chapter and expounding on that. This was fantastic for me. I would actually just download from the website to my phone and listen to these commentaries as I was folding laundry or mowing the lawn, which I think was a great way for me to do it because having my physical body engage in something else just kind of allowed me to download things. And it took me probably, I would say, about 10 chapters of studying Isaiah like in this way before something just clicked for me. And all of a sudden, I just got it. I got Isaiah. It's like learning a new language, and all of a sudden, you get it. And the brilliant thing about this prophecy is that once you have that language under your belt, now the Lord can communicate to you through that language. And you might start receiving things that you never could before because you didn't have the language and the understanding for that. But now you do. The other things that are available here for you are basically what I taught you in a nutshell here, but more in depth. And then these vignettes. All right, so you can also go, besides that was IsaiahExplained.com, you can go to these IsaiahInstitute.com. It's the same people. And there are some fantastic resources here. Now, this is what I use now. It's the Isaiah app. I think it's like $5 a year, and it is totally worth it. Not only do you have everything that was on that website right at your fingertips there, you also have a side-by-side, the analytical commentary that you can just go in and read if you don't want to listen to it verse by verse. It has the comparison of King James side by side with the Isaiah Institute translation. It has like video vignettes, again, that were kind of on the other one, and so many wonderful free resources and presentations on there. But for me, and this was the really exciting part, you can do a word search. And as you study Isaiah, you're going to realize how valuable that is as you certain words that have really specific meanings come to your mind as you're comparing and reading other chapters or reading the Book of Mormon, and you're wondering, hey, did they put that in there on purpose? You know, because I can assure you they did. I mean, out of all the things that Mormon could have included in the Book of Mormon, why does he include somebody chopping off people's arms? Because arm is a really big thing in the book of Isaiah. And you realize now, as you go into that, all that imagery with the sheep and the stones and this and that all totally relates to Isaiah. So you're going to want a word search feature. And that's what I love about this. Also, you can access these books. There are audio versions of all of these books. They are so helpful. I really love these as well. I haven't like read all his books, but there are specific ones like Kings and Queens of the Gentiles that are very, very helpful. Okay, and then Facebook can be a really great resource for you. There's the Discover Isaiah with the Isaiah Institute that has everybody in there who's kind of involved with the Isaiah Institute. You can ask questions there and get feedback or just share ideas with people. It's really great. So let's go up to one last thing here that I forgot to mention, which is Bible Hub. And this is helpful. For instance, if you wanted to go to Isaiah, so let's just go here to the book of Isaiah, chapter 1. You can look at different translations, which I actually do find helpful now that I've kind of gone through the Isaiah Institute translation, because the thing with ancient Hebrew, biblical Hebrew, is it's a dead language. And we actually, not that long ago, discovered all these new words that we didn't know were words. Because for a while we were limited to about 800 words or so, but we knew that those words had multiple meanings, right? And part of that is because, again, the literature in Hebrew, it's not like how we use words in English. If they say something like tree, that word tree doesn't just mean like sort of a chalk outline of a tree, and that's what a tree is. When they talk about the word tree, they mean everything that has to do with the tree, from the leaves to the fruit, to the fact that it has roots, to the fact that it takes water and that it needs sunshine to grow. And all of that can mean tree in the Hebrew. And as I've gone through and applied the text of Isaiah more personally to myself, there are times where the Spirit kind of whispers, look into that word a little more. And so I look at some other meanings, because some of these Hebrew words can have multiple meanings. And I find a meaning that applies a bit more to what the Spirit's trying to teach me in that moment. So you can go into different translations, or what you can do is come up here to Hebrew, and you can do your own little Hebrew study, because they will give you every single word in English and Hebrew. And then you can go in. So for instance, this word vision here, you can click on that, and it's going to tell you that that word is chason, and it might give you some different definitions of that. So anyway, just a useful tool. It'll show you where that word is located in other texts within the Bible as well. All right. Well, hopefully now that we've got some of these tools under our belt, you can move on to studying a little bit of Isaiah on your own this week. And I would encourage you to read the first 2 chapters, because that's what we'll be going over next week. And I also have maybe just a little homework for you too, which I'll mention at the end. But the reading the Book of Mormon this week is pretty succinct, which is good for us, because this video is already probably getting a little overwhelming for some of you. It's the title page. It's just 2 paragraphs. But let's see if we can't get a little more out of this than we have before because of our understanding. So this was written, we believe, by Moroni. It was on the plates and translated by Joseph Smith. And it says, wherefore it is an abridgment of the record of the people of Nephi and also of the Lamanites, written to the Lamanites, who are a remnant of the house of Israel, and also to the Jew and Gentile. So this is written to the remnants that have been scattered, right, or led away, like Lehi. It's written to the Jews, so the Jews need to be able to relate to this. And I think that is very possible because, like I said, this is definitely patterned after Isaiah, which is patterned after the manner of the Jews. And who are the Gentiles? That can get a little tricky here, so let's keep reading. Written by way of commandment and also by the spirit of prophecy and of revelation, written and sealed up and hid up unto the Lord, that they might not be destroyed, to come forth by the gift and power of God unto the interpretation thereof. What does that sound like to me? That sounds a lot like Isaiah, which was sealed up through these encryptions and codes and things like that, so it might not be destroyed or tampered with. and could only really come forth by the gift and power of God through prophecy and things like that, as far as the interpretation thereof goes. Sealed by the hand of Moroni and hid up unto the Lord to come forth in due time by way of who? The Gentile. So according to Moroni and Mormon and all these Book of Mormon prophets, who are the Gentiles? We are. Joseph Smith was. Now, I know that can get a little confusing because it's like, well, we're Ephraim, we're Israel. Well, yes. And actually in Isaiah, when Nephi is quoting Isaiah, he's going to refer to us as Ephraim. But when Nephi and those prophets are referring to us in the latter days, they're going to refer to us as the Gentiles. So keep that in mind. That's important. And just kind of for some more textual proof with this concept, let's go to Genesis 48. Now, this is where Joseph of Egypt is made head over all of Egypt. We're going to totally go into that next week with our beginning chapters of the Book of Mormon. And his father, Jacob, comes to him and he's going to bless his sons, Ephraim and Manasseh. So let's read this. And Israel stretched out his right hand and laid it upon Ephraim's head, who was the younger, and his left hand upon Manasseh's head, guiding his hands wittingly, for Manasseh was firstborn, right? And Joseph said unto his father, not so, my father, for this is the firstborn. Put thy right hand upon his head. And his father refused and said, I know it, my son, I know it. He also shall become a people, and he also shall be great. But truly his younger brother shall be greater than he, and his seed shall become a multitude of nations. Now, what does that word mean, a multitude of nations? Well, this is where learning a little bit of Hebrew comes in handy here. What we have here is the Hebrew, malo, and then ha-goyim. Ha-goyim, so goyim is the word for Gentiles. It can also mean nations, right? That's why we have to look up multiple meanings sometimes. So multitude of nations in this context can be also translated as a fullness, right? Malo, of the Gentiles. So who are the fullness of the Gentiles in one sense? Ephraim. The Ephraimite Gentiles are the fullness of the Gentiles. Where have we heard that phrase? In 2 Nephi. It's referenced multiple times in various ways, also in Doctrine and Covenants. So fullness of the Gentiles is, I feel, a more correct translation in this sense of what Israel is saying here about Ephraim. Okay, moving on. An abridgment taken from the book of Ether also, which is a record of the people of Jared, who were scattered at the time the Lord confounded the language of the people when they were building a tower to get to heaven. Now, why include all of that in a super brief title page or end page commentary on the Book of Mormon? I mean, that's a lot to say about that little tiny book that was included. Could it be, again, because he's trying to help us understand this is in reference to us? When it comes to the language being confounded, are we living in a time where our language is confounded? I mean, can you just get online and talk to a friend or speak to your neighbor about some truth that you understand to be true and they'll just get it? Can you just talk about some social problem or a political thing or whatever it is, and like, yes, your neighbor will understand, you know, and you'll have like a similar foundation of understanding? I mean, could you say the sky is blue in this day and age to your neighbor? Would they agree with you, or would they find some way to disagree with you? I think we are living in an era where our language is being confounded. We are the brother of Jared, and that's what he's trying to tell us here. And what was going on during that time? They were building a tower to get to heaven. So let's dive into that just a little more here. Where else does it talk about a tower? It talks about it in Doctrine and Covenant, section 101. Now, in this text here, this is a revelation that came when the people were being severely persecuted in Jackson County. They were being driven out, and it was just a horrible time where they were just suffering severe persecution. Let's just say that. So what does the Lord have to say about this? Well, he says that he's allowing this persecution to happen because of their transgressions. And yet he says, they will be mine in that day when I shall come to make up my jewels. Jewels is a big thing in Isaiah and in these Old Testament scriptures. It's highly, highly symbolic. So we'll get into that. But the point is, in the last days, there's something that's going to happen where they will be gathered. But for right now, he's allowing them to be scattered, these saints in Missouri, right? During the times of Joseph Smith. And why? Well, because of contention. And how many times has our prophet spoken to us about contention? And where's that leading us to? And how much more will we end up being like the brother of Jared? All right, so they included their inheritance. And, you know, in the last days, hopefully there will be people found upon a watchtower and Israel will be saved. And, you know, people who give their lives for him will be crowned and Zion will be there. But in the meantime, that's not where they're at right now. So let's go to this allegory that he has here. And he actually starts it off by talking about seeking his face and seeking eternal life and being the salt of the earth. That's actually going to come up later too. That's going to be a really fun, interesting lesson about being the saviors of men and the salt of the earth. But in the meantime, he speaks of wisdom and Zion and this chastening that is happening to them. Why is it happening to them? Well, let's compare it to this parable, okay? And now I will show unto you a parable that you may know my will concerning the redemption of Zion. The redemption. We could go into that, but let's just say that has to do with a remnant being gathered in. A certain nobleman had a spot of land very choice, and he said unto his servants, go ye unto my vineyard, even upon this very choice piece of land. Where's the choice piece of land? We know where the choice land is. And plant 12 olive trees, 12, right? And set watchmen round about them and build a tower. Okay, so we do have watchmen. We're supposed to build this tower that one may overlook the land round about to be a watchman upon the tower, that mine olive trees may not be broken down when the enemy shall come to spoil and take upon themselves the fruit of my vineyard. Now, the servants of the nobleman went and did as their Lord commanded them, and planted the olive trees and built a hedge round about, and set watchmen and began to build a tower. And while they were yet laying the foundation thereof, they began to say among themselves, and what need hath my Lord of this tower? And consulted for a long time. Okay, a long time in the Lord's time. That's kind of a long time. Saying among themselves, what need hath my Lord of this tower? Seeing this is a time of peace. Might not this money be given to the exchangers? For there is no need of these things. And while they were at variance one with another, they became very slothful, and they hearkened not unto commandments of their Lord. And the enemy came by night and broke down the hedge, and the servants of the nobleman arose and were affrighted and fled. And the enemy destroyed their works and broke down the olive trees. Now, first of all, you could see a lot of parallels here with Jacob 5, the allegory of the olive trees. But in studying Isaiah, this is, well, there's a couple things here, but it's almost directly taken from Isaiah 56. Now, I'm going to read King James Version here, but just because that's what's linked, but just know the Isaiah Institute translation is even more understandable when it comes to this. Listen to this language here and see for yourself, is the Lord referencing Isaiah 56? His watchmen are blind. They are all ignorant. They are all dumb. Why are they blind? Because they're not in a tower. They can't see, right? Dumb dogs. They cannot bark. They can't warn anyone, right? Sleeping, lying down, loving to slumber. Yea, they are greedy, right? Let's just keep the money for ourselves. Dogs which can never have enough, and they are shepherds, right? What are shepherds supposed to do? That cannot understand. They don't have that prophecy. They all look to their own way, every one for his gain from his quarter. Come ye, say they, I will fetch wine. And there's so many things in Isaiah and the Book of Mormon about wine and getting drunk off this fruit, which is the fruit of the vineyard. So anyway, and we will fill ourselves with strong drink. For and tomorrow shall be as this day, and much more abundant. So you can see there are some really direct parallels here with Isaiah. Now, moving on. Now behold, the nobleman, the Lord of the vineyard, called upon his servants and said unto them, why? What is the cause of this great evil? Ought ye not to have done even as I commanded you? And after he had planted the vineyard and built the hedge round about and set watchmen upon the walls thereof, built a tower also. What did we fail to do there? Now, we had already built a temple in Kirtland. It's not talking about building a temple. It's saying they failed to build this tower and set watchmen upon the tower and watched for my vineyard and not have fallen asleep, lest the enemy should come upon you. Now, I'm just going to say there are towers in the Book of Mormon too. If you go and look those up, especially with Helaman, or excuse me, Nephi in the Book of Helaman, on a tower, that's a direct image of this. And behold, the watchman upon the tower would have seen the enemy while he was yet afar off, and then he could have made ready and kept the enemy from breaking down the hedge thereof, and saved my vineyard from the hands of the destroyer. Anyway, and so the Lord goes on to tell his servant, okay, we're going to start gathering now. There are those who are appointed to tarry, and we're going to go throw down the enemy's tower, and then we'll redeem Zion. And his servant says, well, when is this? And the Lord says, well, when I will. Okay, but for now, just do what I said, right? So this hasn't happened yet. Right, let's bring this back now to what we were just reading in the title page. Why do people build a tower in the scriptures? To get to heaven. And there is an unrighteous way of doing it, and there is a righteous way of going about it. And I believe this is why Moroni included this in this text specifically. We are meant to build that tower to get to heaven, to ascend that ladder, or as it shows us in Isaiah, to ascend through those spiritual levels, learn how to do that, and then help bring others to essentially Zion, right? To this heavenly place, to create that. And we'll go into this more in some future lessons, but just ponder really what is Doctrine and Covenant trying to tell us there. What have we not woken up to? What are we asleep to? And I do just kind of want to give a little warning here. Some people, when they see words like shepherds and watchmen, and it's really easy to take your finger of blame and point it at those who you consider to be in positions of authority within this kingdom. And I'm going to incorporate this into a future lesson as well. But we are in a place where we are all in a position to become kings and queens and to have authority to rule. And so if we're going to take a finger of blame and point it anywhere, it needs to go here. We are all called to be shepherds. We are all called to ascend in this way. And so anything that we learn this year in Isaiah, in the Book of Mormon, is meant to be applied personally, always, first and foremost. Okay, so that is our overview of the title page of the Book of Mormon for this week. If you've gotten more out of the title page with this video than you have before, then that's probably a good indication that you might want to go forward and continue to learn more of Isaiah. So please read the first 2 chapters. I have a video that I'm going to post a link to down below, or excuse me, something to read. That's just a beautiful testimony from someone who's not a member of the church, who was asked to translate the Book of Mormon into another language, and how he discovered that it really was Hebrew and Egyptian. And it's just this incredible testimony that is fun to share. Check out some of those other resources, like I said, on Isaiah Explained and the Isaiah Institute. And I would just encourage you to pray and ask sincerely, what does God want you to know and take from your study of Isaiah this year? So welcome to 2024, and let's take this journey together.